from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, 24 hours before meeting with Vladimir Putin, the president lays the stakes of the summit.
We have a meeting with President Putin tomorrow. I think it's going to be a good meeting, but the more important meeting will be the second meeting that we're having. We're going to have a meeting with President Putin, President Zelensky, myself, and maybe we'll bring some of the European leaders along, maybe not.
President Trump signaling a tough stance with Putin ahead of his Alaska summit, while indicating an immediate ceasefire to the war in Ukraine is not a given. We'll have more on what to look for ahead when both leaders meet 1 day from now. Plus, our Bloomberg exclusive tonight, the Trump administration in talks with Intel to have the U.S. government possibly take a stake in the chip maker. We'll have more on that story to help the company's market cap jump just before the close. Also tonight, has inflation finally hit? Producer prices rising unexpectedly by the most in 3 years, from tech to retail, industrial, and more. What the latest corporate report says about the state of the economy as the president speaks before the nation to tout his tax bill's impact on Social Security more than a month since its passage. And an Illinois court rejecting Texas Republicans' bid to arrest fleeing Democratic lawmakers as the fight over redistricting continues. What comes next as both parties look for a way forward? As California Governor Gavin Newsom puts the issue front and center today, now calling for a special election in November.
We're giving the people of this state the power to save democracy, not just in California, but all across the United States of America. I hope we are waking up to this reality.
We'll have our Bloomberg reporters covering it all from Washington to San Francisco. But we begin tonight on the eve of a potentially historic summit between President Trump and Russia's President Vladimir Putin. President Trump setting the scene here for what we could see by this time tomorrow night.
We have a meeting with President Putin tomorrow. I think it's going to be a good meeting, but the more important meeting will be the second meeting that we're having. We're going to have a meeting with President Putin, President Zelensky, myself, and maybe we'll bring some of the European leaders along, maybe not. I don't know that it's going to be very important. We're going to see what happens. And I think President Putin will make peace. I think President Zelensky will make peace. We'll see if they can get along. And if they can, it'll be great.
For more, we turn to Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan, who joins us live from the North Lawn of the White House. Kate, the president will be wheels up tomorrow morning on his way to Alaska. Tell us what we know about the way that this will unfold. Optically, these two men somewhere in a room together, presumably on the base there in Anchorage, Alaska. And now we understand a bilateral news conference afterward. The president projecting some optimism by scheduling that?
Absolutely. So we do have more details about what exactly tomorrow is going to look like. So as you mentioned, it's a day trip for the president. He's going to leave tomorrow morning and return after the talks. So it's going to start with a one-on-one meeting between Trump and Putin. After that, we're going to see a bilateral lunch with the larger delegations. So many more people will be involved in those talks. And as you mentioned, it's very important to note that at the end of these discussions, we are expected to see Trump and Putin appear together at a joint news conference. And this is according to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. So this all depends on how the talks go. You know, we've heard a lot from Trump over the week, sort of downplaying expectations, saying that he could walk away at any moment. He said this morning on Fox Radio that he thought there was a 25% chance that the talks are unsuccessful tomorrow. So continuing to really tamp down expectations there. But we will definitely be watching that news conference in particular very closely to see, you know, what gains, if any, are made to halt the fighting in Ukraine as the war has been raging on for more than 3 years now.
Yeah, pretty remarkable to prepare for what we're going to see here. Kate, do we have a sense on timing? It should be around this time these two presidents are meeting tomorrow.
That's right. So we are expecting the news conference to take place in the evening. You know, I think the timing is still a little bit fluid as they're figuring things out. But I also just wanted to note, you know, just the fact that this summit is taking place is so historic. It's going to be the first time that the Russian president is stepping foot on U.S. soil in 10 years. It's the first time that Trump and Putin are meeting in person since Trump took office for his second term. The first time since their meeting since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. And you know, very importantly, the last time that these two leaders were at a joint press conference together, it was in 2018 at Helsinki. And Trump sided with the Russian president over the United States intelligence community when it comes to their assessment of Russian interference in the 2016 election. So there are a lot of factors at play here. And I think, European allies, Ukrainians, everyone will be watching very closely to see what actually comes out of this meeting, because, of course, they are not actually at the table yet. Trump keeps talking about a potential second summit. But as of right now, it really is just Trump and Putin.
And we'll have it all live for you here at this time tomorrow. Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan from the White House. We thank you. As we now look ahead to the summit, the White House Secret Service is busy preparing for the arrival of both world leaders. Today on the early edition of Balance of Power, I spoke with the governor of Alaska, Mike Dunleavy, about the prep that's underway in Anchorage and throughout his state.
Most of this is being handled by the White House itself, and they're doing a great job. They've interfaced with us. They've interfaced with our troopers and city police here in Anchorage. And so the vast majority of this is being handled by the White House. It is tourist season. We're in the height of tourist season, so hotels are tight, cars are tight, as you mentioned.
Right.
But again, having this on the base alleviates a lot of issues.
Joining us now live from Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York with more on his reporting on the preparations here, Bloomberg's Myles Miller. Myles, great stuff today on the terminal. Reciprocity is the word that sticks in my head here as the Secret Service needs to protect both of these individuals.
That's right. In Anchorage tonight, the Secret Service is running one of the largest security operations the city's ever seen ahead of that summit between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. With just a week's notice, hundreds of agents, weapons, and communications gear, as well as medical equipment, have been flown in. We have motorcade SUVs arriving on cargo planes from the lower 48. Rental lots have been cleared of cars, and hotel rooms are at capacity. Now, that meeting, of course, taking place at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, a Cold War-era installation less than 1,000 miles from Russia, and it's fortified gates. And we know that it's controlled airspace, it's instant access to military units, what makes it the most secure location in Alaska. Both nations are matching each other, agent for agent, weapon for weapon, and separate motorcades and translators are on hold, as well as rooms being negotiated down to the size of the space. All of it to make sure that these talks go off without a hitch.
Myles, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Myles Miller in New York. For more insights into how Europe now is watching tomorrow's meeting, Bloomberg's Erik Martin, who joins us here in our Washington bureau. Erik, there will not be European leaders at this meeting or at this table, and many are concerned that the president could make an agreement they're not comfortable with, particularly this idea of a truce that freezes lines in place. There's been an alternate plan. They want to see security guarantees. To what extent are those leaders giving the president some advice ahead of this meeting tomorrow?
That's a great question, Joe. We saw yesterday the call between President Trump, Vice President Vance, and the leaders of a number of European nations, Italy, the UK, France, Germany, as well as NATO. And so a lot of concern wanting to make sure that whatever agreement President Trump should reach with, and whatever understanding he should reach with President Putin tomorrow, includes the ability of Ukraine to defend itself in the future. Remember, some countries in Europe have supported Ukraine actually joining NATO. This is a position that they've come out with in the past year. And so it's important, really important for countries in Western Europe that Ukraine be able to defend itself. The sovereign and the territorial integrity of Ukraine very high on the minds of these other European leaders.
President Trump, that is, that he would brief European leaders following this meeting. That's how we understand they'll learn about what happened. That's right.
He's mentioned that if the meeting goes well, he thinks that he would be on the phone potentially and communicating with European leaders and with President Zelensky immediately after the meeting. I think it's fascinating what Kate just mentioned in terms of a press conference, a bilateral press conference being planned, because while President Trump has said that there's a 25% chance that this won't go well, that means there's still a 75% chance that it will go well.
Sure.
I asked Secretary of State Marco Rubio earlier today about this at an event that he had at the State Department. Yeah. He said they are hopeful that this is an opportunity for President Trump to look President Putin in the eye and see what is possible, what his intentions are, and what his commitment is to reaching a peace agreement. And so even as they remain cautious on the outcome, seeing these kinds of steps being taken, even in terms of logistics for a joint message, also raises the bar and the expectations that there will be something positive to say coming out of this meeting tomorrow.
No, it's not just the 25% odds he said on that radio interview today. He also talked about a few things with Brian Kilmeade on Fox News, including the idea of maybe President Zelensky shows up after all. There's not a chance he's going to be at the table tomorrow, is there?
We haven't heard anything like that, but this idea, building up the expectation that there will be a second meeting in short order in President Trump's hopes and in his aspirations for the outcome of this, is a really fascinating potential objective and goal going into this tomorrow, that tomorrow may be not a final agreement, but the start of a process that would, of course, involve President Zelensky and have Ukrainian representation to decide the country's future.
We'll find out tomorrow. Bloomberg's Erik Martin, thank you so much. As we turn now to a Bloomberg exclusive and a stock mover today, the Trump administration is now said to be in talks with Intel, the chip maker, to have the U.S. government potentially take a stake in the company. The move would be to support the company's effort to expand domestic manufacturing. And joining us now with more details, Bloomberg's Tom Giles, live from San Francisco. Tom, do we have a sense of the size of the stake? I'm guessing the meeting with the CEO a couple of days ago went really well.
Yeah, just a few days ago, President Trump was calling for Lip-Bhutan's resignation. That's the CEO of Intel. He was saying he's conflicted. What a difference a meeting with Trump can make. A couple days later, he meets with Trump, goes to kiss the ring. Trump comes away feeling impressed by his interaction with Lip-Bhutan, talking about his background. Lip-Bhutan saying that there was some misinformation about him. The background here being that in the past, he has been involved in a venture capital firm that had stakes in a lot of Chinese companies. He sat on the board of Chinese chip makers. Fast forward a few days later, these two are talking about a much deeper, more meaningful relationship between the U.S. government and Intel. It's very early days. A lot of details we don't know. Things could fall completely apart, go totally sideways. But if it comes together like we're hearing, the idea would be that the government would take some sort of a stake in Intel. Intel would use that funding to accelerate, to somehow bolster its plans to build a big manufacturing hub in the state of Ohio, which, don't forget, has swung in favor of Trump recently. The idea here, I mean, Intel could really use an infusion right now. They've had a lot of struggles. They have fallen behind technologically. They have delayed the rollout of this, the creation, They've delayed this manufacturing plant in Ohio several times, pushing it back several years. Government wants to really jumpstart that. So this infusion could make a big difference in the near term to their ability to get that off the ground.
Well, this is one heck of an evolution. When you look at the posts on Truth Social after the president called for the resignation of Lip-Bhutan, following their meeting, he talked about his amazing story, but went on to say, "The Tan and my cabinet members are going to spend time together and bring suggestions to me during the next week." It's almost as if he was forecasting this very story.
Well, you have to think that, there's some precedent for this under the Trump administration. He's not averse to some very unconventional and some would argue legally questionable relationships with some of these companies, talking about that, getting the 15% of sales of those chips by AMD and NVIDIA to China. Not a lot of precedent for that. As our colleagues have written, some questions about whether that's actually constitutional, but that's a whole other story. This is the idea of the government taking a stake in a private company, and is that the right thing for them in the long term? Short term, investors kind of like the idea. You saw what the shares did after we broke that news.
Remarkable. Yeah, absolutely. Quite an infusion here. And I should note that Intel is declining to comment on the specifics of the Bloomberg report. Intel has issued, however, the following statement, quote, "Intel is deeply committed to supporting President Trump's efforts to strengthen U.S. technology and manufacturing leadership. We look forward to continuing our work with the Trump administration to advance these shared priorities, but we are not going to comment on rumors or speculation." Tom, appreciate your time and great reporting. Bloomberg's Tom Giles with a Bloomberg exclusive. We thank you. Coming up on Balance of Power, President Trump touting the success of his tax legislation, but how are voters reacting on the ground? We'll get a live report from Iowa up ahead, but first we'll continue our preview of tomorrow's summit between Presidents Trump and Putin. With retired General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, is with us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
if I were president, I'd be able to negotiate an end to this horrible and rapidly escalating war within 24 hours. Before I even arrive at the Oval Office shortly after we all together win the presidency, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine settled. It will be done within 24 hours. Before I even arrive at the Oval Office shortly after we win the presidency, we win the presidency, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine totally settled.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. That was President Trump, of course, on the campaign trail leading up to his re-election last November. Today, 206 days since he was sworn into office, President Trump spoke with Fox News Radio about ending the war, saying, quote, "I've stopped 6 wars this year. This was going to be one of the easy ones, but it never works out that way. This turns out to be probably the most difficult," unquote. Joining us now again on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio for more analysis, retired U.S. Army General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe. General, I have so many questions for you leading up to this meeting tomorrow, but when you hear those remarks from the campaign trail, 24 hours, I'll have this done maybe even before I'm in the White House. What is the lesson that Donald Trump has learned in this second term about Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think it's not easy to end this war, but I think the American people also, they know that when people speak on the campaign trail, sometimes they mean it, sometimes they don't.
Fair enough. Here we are then on the eve of what could be an historic summit. I don't know how high your expectations are. The president has most recently been trying to tamp them down. But let's start with the concept here in its essence, the idea of Vladimir Putin stepping foot on an American military base. As a man who spent a career in uniform, is that appropriate?
Well, it certainly isn't appropriate in terms of conventional diplomacy. But nothing the president does in these matters is conventional. He may think that there's a real advantage gained by bringing Putin onto his home turf. A lot of people see it the other way. But the question is, what's the bottom line? What's going to come out of this?
Is this summit the most important event in the war since Russia invaded Ukraine?
I wouldn't say it's the most important event. I would say, however, that there are high risks in this summit. Not political risks for the president. Of course, that's there, but he takes those risks all the time, risks that previous presidents wouldn't take, of having meetings and the meeting going nowhere and so forth. He doesn't worry about that. No, the risk is the risk that this could really discombobulate the fragile support for Ukraine. You've got the Europeans who are struggling to put the resources into it. Ukraine is struggling after 3.5 years, and right now the Trump administration is not providing really any military assistance other than what's been provided by Biden. And they've said the Europeans, if they get their act together, could put money in it and buy it. Look, Putin's been on this campaign to take back the Soviet space since he was put in as the president in 2000. He's the senior statesman in the world today. He's met dozens and dozens of leaders. I don't think we're going to be able to buy him off in this meeting and say, give up on your 25-year quest to restore the Soviet Union. Have good relations with me, President Trump. I don't think that's going to turn the tide. Hope it does, but it seems unlikely.
When we consider potential outcomes tomorrow, General, I spoke yesterday here on Balance of Power with Daniel Fried, the former U.S. ambassador to Poland, former Assistant Secretary of State for Europe. Here's what he suggested about President Trump proposing in terms of a truce during this summit. Listen.
The trick is to agree on a ceasefire line, an armistice line, that's not a permanent international border. You do something that is a ceasefire line. It gives Russia something. They keep the territories they're occupying, but you don't ask Zelensky or the Ukrainians to agree to it permanently. It becomes an armistice. He gets this, that is a ceasefire in place. He deserves it. The other half of this is security for Ukraine.
Is the ambassador onto something there, General, an armistice, a temporary solution?
It's diplomatic speak, Joe. The truth is that Mr. Putin's going to do whatever is in his interest. If he believes that he needs a pause in the fighting, if he could do something that would keep the Ukrainian drones away from his petrochemical complexes and his munitions plants temporarily while he catches his breath, moves his stockpiles forward, recruits another 10,000 or 100,000 soldiers, strengthens his logistics base in Belarus, yeah, he might agree to that. And it might be exactly as Dan Fried says it is. But he's going to do what's in his interest. And that's what we have to understand going into this. We have not put any pressure on him that would make him do something that's not in his interest. We haven't said we're going to really amp up. We don't know what the very serious consequences would be if he doesn't agree. We've threatened tariffs again and again and again and again. And look, it's not just this administration. Obama threatened them and put them on, and the Biden administration did so. And it hasn't dissuaded President Putin from pursuing his ambition. And the latest news I'm seeing is he's going to be prepared to give another lecture to President Trump about why Ukraine isn't a real country. And that's not productive.
That's right. That's what we are hearing from Kyiv, that he'll try to make that case tomorrow. What are the chances we end up with a demilitarized zone in the Donbass, General?
Don't think it's going to happen. Look, Ukraine cannot give up its territory that it's holding right now. These are fortified positions. And to the west, if they were to move west, there are no comparable positions that could be prepared short of the Dnieper River. And that's 100, 150 miles to the west. So everything between there is open steppe, basically rolling 8, 10 kilometers, a field of view, scattered patches of forest, but mostly farmland. That's not good defensive terrain for this kind of warfare that Ukraine's prepared to fight. But it would be good for the Russians, if Ukraine was pushed back to that. So I don't think Ukraine can make any agreement for a ceasefire zone unless it's all on the Russian side. And certainly Putin's not going to agree with that.
Yeah, well, you make a lot of sense. If I'm hearing you right, though, General, Vladimir Putin tomorrow will be rewarded for his bad behavior. Is that fair?
That's the fear. And it doesn't seem like he's going to be punished. Look, he started a major war. He's done billions of dollars worth of damage. He's killed hundreds of thousands of people. He attacks civilian people and institutions and hospitals and nurseries and schools with impunity. He's abducted children. I know that the president wants to end it, and I'm all in favor of it. I think every American should be. But to the idea that you can sort of buy this off, wash all this under, and think the world community's going to go on as before, it won't. And I go back to we knew the Afghanistan proposal for the U.S. pullout was a disaster that was negotiated in the last Trump administration. Now it fell on Biden to do it. But it's the same principle of, it's sort of like peace at any price, and it won't work. We learned it. It's called appeasement. It won't work.
The words of retired U.S. Army General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. General, thank you, as always. Coming up on Balance of Power, wholesale inflation accelerating in July by the most in 3 years. We'll discuss what that means for the state of the economy and for President Trump's economic agenda with Kitty Richards at the Groundwork Collaborative next on Bloomberg.
Last month, I signed one big, beautiful bill and allowed no tax on Social Security for our great seniors, okay? So how's that? Not bad, right? No tax on Social Security for our seniors. And to protect our benefits, we've already kicked nearly 275,000 illegal aliens off of the Social Security system.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for coming along. President Trump there earlier today touting the success of his new tax legislation and the positive impact he believes it's having across the country, as many Republican lawmakers spend August recess playing defense over the president's big, beautiful bill. It is town hall season. Joining us now live from the Iowa State Fair, To share how voters are responding to this measure is Bloomberg's Erik Wasson. He's not just there to eat the fried stick of butter or the lobster corn dog. Erik, in the field for us, it's great to see you, and I'm wondering what you are hearing about the big, beautiful bill, tariffs, and inflation.
You know, it's really an opportunity for both parties to define this bill. Many voters aren't really sure what's in it. Democrats are really banking on the Medicaid cuts, the possible cuts to rural hospitals, changing their fortunes here. Iowa used to be a purple state. It's increasingly a red state. They feel that the economic effects of this are going to be bad. And the tariffs also are really starting to bite, especially farmers. I talked to a lot of farmers here. They're very nervous about the China market going away for corn and soybeans. Even some of the biggest Trump supporters say they're sticking with the president for now, but they need to see a deal. And they want to see something before this next 90-day pause expires. They're very nervous about how that's going to play. I followed around Zach Nunn and Marionette Miller Meeks. They're two of the most vulnerable House Republicans, and they were here at the fair talking about the aspects of the big, beautiful bill that are popular, like no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. But they're also having to face questions about wind power, for example. The bill ends subsidies for wind power. Iowa's a big wind power producing state. They have to answer questions about rural hospitals. You know, Steve Scalise, the majority leader, was out here. I talked to him. He said these races are critical for them retaining the majority. So the battle for the midterms has already begun here in Iowa.
Boy, that's fascinating, Erik. This is, of course, a major staging ground for campaigns when we're in campaign season, but it sounds like campaign season has already begun.
Yeah, the stakes couldn't be higher. Democrats are completely in the political wilderness. They have to win these seats. They'll probably win a seat in Nebraska, but with redistricting going on in Texas, Missouri, Ohio, and Indiana possibly, they just cannot afford to lose these seats. So they're really out here. They've got strong candidates in all the races. They have a popular state auditor running for governor on the Democratic side. They're hoping there'll be more enthusiasm. But then again, they were hoping there was going to be enthusiasm in 24, and they got badly beaten. So I think, you know, for farmers, this tariff policy is really, really crucial. I think the president would probably be wise to listen to their concerns, because that's going to be a real vulnerability even among his most diehard supporters. I think for now, my sense out here is the president is getting the benefit of the doubt. There are a lot of Trump flags. I went to the Democrat and Republican booth every day. The Republican booth is much more popular, but we'll see how long that can last.
Fascinating. Make sure to try the Chicken Pickle Ranch Rocket on a stick while you're there, Erik. It's great to see you at the fair. Bloomberg's Erik Wasson with us live on Bloomberg, live from Iowa, as lawmakers tout the tax bill and its economic impact. Fresh economic data showing producer prices climbing by the most in 3 years, even as the president earlier today said that inflation is down to a perfect number, his words. Joining us now on Balance of Power to break that down, Kitty Richards, senior fellow at the Groundwork Collaborative, former Treasury Department official in the Biden administration. Kitty, it's always a pleasure to have you here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Is President Trump right? Inflation at the perfect number?
It's great to be here. It's interesting to hear President Trump saying that, given that inflation is coming in well above the Fed's 2% target, just as it has been for quite some time. And we started to see this Tuesday the beginning of the impacts of the tariffs and just the general uncertainty that Trump's chaotic tariff policy has caused on the consumer price index. But as you said today, what we saw was a much hotter than expected producer price index reading. Now, that's the costs for producers of the goods that then feed into the consumer price index. And the fact is that those producer price increases tend to then drive up consumer prices as corporations protect their profit margins. And we really saw this during the pandemic when supply shortages gave corporations the ability to hike prices because they were lacking competition. They did so, and we saw quarter after quarter of record corporate profits. And we're already seeing consumer prices going up, and now we're seeing producer prices going up, and there's no reason to think that they won't pass those prices right along to consumers. That said, some producers, like those farmers in Iowa, are having a real hard time getting their goods to market, getting the price they need to offset these rising tariff costs. So I think that we're starting to see tariffs filter through into prices for both producers and consumers in a way that is also dampening the economy. We saw really bad jobs numbers last week, including revisions to the prior few months. So I think, we've talked about before that there could be a big lag in these tariff effects, and they're finally starting to bite.
Well, of course, the president says those jobs numbers were rigged, Kitty. And if you take the argument over producer prices to the White House today, the president or his lieutenants would tell you that it was services that actually drove the increase in prices, not goods that would typically be associated with tariffs. Are they wrong?
You know, I think if I were to look under the hood of the producer price index, I'd focus on core PPI, which is what the Fed is going to focus on, and what drives into the Fed's preferred measures of inflation. Core PPI was actually even hotter than general PPI because energy services had dropped in price, and so that's holding down the overall headline number. So I think any way you slice it, this is not good news for investors who were hoping for a Fed rate cut in September.
Yeah. Well, so as everyone waits to see if or when producers start passing along these prices to consumers, I spoke about it on the early edition of Balance of Power with Betsy Stevenson, professor of public policy and economics at the University of Michigan. Kitty, here's what she said about what companies are considering when it comes to all this.
Companies don't like Procter & Gamble to announce an increase in prices and then say 6 months later, we were just kidding. Tariffs are gone. We didn't need that price increase. Sorry, we did that to you. It costs them too much in terms of loyalty. So companies are slow to pass along price increases. And I think we all need to keep that in mind.
Is that what's about to happen, Kitty? We did hear from Procter & Gamble. We've heard from other companies warning about the impact of tariffs who have not passed along costs yet. Once they do reach the consumer level, will they stick?
It's interesting. I have a slightly different take from Betsy. It is true that some companies are trying to hold on to brand loyalty, avoiding passing on prices. Other companies that have the ability to have actually passed along costs to consumers before they've seen the costs in their own bottom line. And I think the place where I really agree with what she was saying is that companies are then very reluctant to bring prices back down. And frankly, unless they have strong competition or something else putting pressure on their pricing ability, there's no reason for them to. They can just continue the high prices, even if the tariffs go away, and pad their profits. And that's what we saw during the pandemic, and it's what we've seen during most periods of inflation.
Well, I'm guessing that you're not making the argument for interest rate cuts here as the White House is. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent talked to us here on Bloomberg yesterday. He was on Bloomberg Surveillance, talked in detail about how he would like to see the Fed cut rates, 150 to 175 bips, he said. Today he went on Fox Business following this morning's data to set the record straight on his feelings. Here's Scott Bessent.
I didn't tell the Fed what to do. What I said was that to get to a neutral rate on interest, that would be approximately a 150 basis point cut. I did not call for them to get there. The other thing that I said was that perhaps because they had bad BLS data in June and July, that perhaps a 50 basis point cut in September was warranted.
The fact of the matter is, Kitty, the market was actually betting up until yesterday on a move similar to what the Treasury Secretary recommended, realizing he didn't tell the Fed what to do. How did this morning's data change your view on interest rates?
I think it's really difficult to know what the Fed should do. I have been arguing for quite some time that the Fed should have normalized interest rates last year. And those high interest rates are really putting the squeeze on Americans, especially when they're trying to buy a house or rent an apartment. It decreases housing supply, drives up costs directly and indirectly. And folks who are having to put those higher prices on a credit card are paying that high interest every month. And it's really difficult for family security. However, the Trump administration is not addressing any of those cost drivers and instead is engaging in this chaotic tariff policy that's driving prices up. And I think that's a really difficult position for the Fed to be in, especially as they see potential weakening in the labor market, but remain concerned about what Trump's policies are going to do to inflation over the next 6 months.
Okay, so what would happen if they cut by 150 bips right now?
That would be pretty unexpected. I think
it sure would. But what would be the economic effect?
I don't think anyone expects the Fed to make those moves. No. And so far, they've been in a wait-and-see mode. And I think the rest of us are in a wait-and-see what they wait-and-see mode.
Yeah. Kitty, thank you. It's always a pleasure to have you. Kitty Richards, Senior Fellow at the Groundwork Collaborative, with us on this PPI Day. Coming up, we'll turn back to our conversation on tomorrow's summit between President Trump and Vladimir Putin when we assemble our political panel. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Much more on tomorrow's sit-down between Vladimir Putin and President Trump, coming up with our political panel. First, the stories we're watching in today's Power Brief. Doctors Without Borders reporting a growing cholera outbreak in Sudan, only getting worse and could take a prolonged period to help eradicate. The medical charity said the outbreak in the region, which has been hit with a 2-year war, has been fueled by water shortages and overcrowding in displacement camps. The group says more than 2,400 cholera-related deaths have been reported so far this year. A new Gallup poll finding that alcohol consumption among U.S. adults has hit the lowest level on record, with only 54% of Americans claiming to consume alcohol. This coincides with the growing belief that even one drink a day is bad for your health. Now, the majority view for the first time the trend of young adults abstaining from alcohol has accelerated in recent years. Even those who do partake report that they are drinking less than they used to. The Texas GOP lost its bid today to have an Illinois court intervene in its quest to get Democratic lawmakers who fled the state back to Austin. County judge saying Illinois courts have no inherent power to meddle with the issue as Democratic lawmakers remain on the lam, so to speak, to stymie a legislative session on new congressional maps in Texas. It's all, of course, part of the fight over redistricting we've talked about that now has a handful of states from Indiana and New York to Florida and California all contemplating redrawing their own congressional maps ahead of the 2026 midterms. On that front, California Governor Gavin Newsom saying this to supporters today when announcing a special election on the issue for November.
This is the difference. This is the difference between what's happening in Texas and what's happening here in California. We didn't receive a phone call from the President of the United States to then quietly go in the back room and start drawing maps and legislatively try to jam them through. We're putting the maps on the ballot and we're giving the power to the people. This will be the first redistricting that's ever done that. That's the difference.
Suddenly now a story that is just beginning. And as we await tomorrow's much-anticipated meetup between President Trump and Vladimir Putin, the world turns its attention to the state of Alaska, where officials have had only a week to prepare. On the early edition of Balance of Power today, I spoke with Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy about the significance of tomorrow's event.
A huge deal for Alaska. It makes sense when you look at the globe. We're only 2.5 miles from Russia. The president of Russia just has to fly a few miles across the Bering Sea to get here. President Trump has to come up from the lower 48, go through Canada. And so we're closer. I think we're closer to Moscow by about 2.5 hours than Washington, D.C. is going the other way. And so makes sense to be here.
And as preparations get underway in Anchorage, we turn now to this evening's political panel. Matt Gorman is with us, Executive Vice President at Targeted Victory, our Republican strategist, alongside Democratic strategist Stephanie Murphy, former Democratic Congresswoman from Florida, who is now running for mayor of Orange County, Florida. Great to have both of you with us on what is going to be a great panel. Matt, here we go. The eve of the summit. President's trying to tamp down expectations. That's what you'd be doing as well, right?
Exactly. No, look, we'll see if something can come from this tangibly. But look, this is meaningful engagement, right? Sitting down. The Russians haven't had a good spring or summer relative to in the past. They've lost more lives and they've gotten less for what they have. So we're going to see if Putin is serious tomorrow. I don't expect a ceasefire. I mean, that would probably be the best coming out of this, right? But I don't anticipate anything tangible. I think this is to poke around, see if Putin means business, see if he shells folks in God forbid, Kyiv on the way home, and kind of see if they can go forward.
We're looking at a live view of the joint base in Anchorage where the two will be meeting. And the optics ought to be something here tomorrow, Congresswoman. I'm not sure your thoughts on this summit because we haven't had a chance to talk until now. The narrative in Washington has been this is a win for Putin to simply get the meeting. How does President Trump turn this into a win with anything short of a ceasefire?
Well, I think that this summit comes on the heels of a foreign policy win for Trump when he negotiated the peace deal recently between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And so it is an important summit, but I think it's significant that both sides are setting expectations a bit lower. You hear Putin saying that, there's nothing binding that's going to come out of this summit. And then you also hear on Trump in the White House are saying that, even Trump, he said that there's only a 25% chance that this meeting, that there is a 25% chance that this meeting could fail. And given the history between these two leaders, you can see why they're both trying to lower expectations. Trump came into office saying he was going to end this war on day one. And he's expressed some frustration with his dealings with Putin, saying maybe he's just tapping him along. And then Putin, for his part, has engaged and then delayed, continuing military action while giving the impression that he wants to engage in peace talks. So you can see why everybody is trying to set lower expectations.
Yeah. Important news today that we're going to be anticipating a bilateral news conference after this event. Right at this time tomorrow, we'll be counting down to these two gentlemen apparently walking out to twin podia somewhere on the base, presumably. Matt, smart move to indulge Vladimir Putin on that level, to have him essentially standing as an equal to Trump before the media.
I mean, due respect, he is an equal. He is also a world leader who has a thing to play here, right? So I never understood kind of the line of argument that you have from some on the left where it's like, I can't believe he's here. I can't believe. Right. Like, he's a world leader. Like, and he started a war that we have to deal with. So you can stand on principle and never talk to him, never, whatever, but like you can't.
Does the news conference legitimize the meeting? Is that the idea here, that America needs to see these two emerge after?
The meeting's legitimized by the fact that the President of the United States is sitting down with him, right? As anybody, right? Because we have to. We have to find a way to end this war. And so, look, I will say this. I think it's smart because what you also want is you want to be able to set the meeting afterwards on your own terms. What did you discuss? What did you not discuss?
Is the story tomorrow, Congresswoman, that we get together with all the fanfare to simply find an agreement to meet again?
And actually, I think that might be a win because the European leaders, as well as Ukraine, are very uncomfortable about a meeting that doesn't include Ukraine. And Trump himself has floated the idea that a subsequent three-way meeting with the Ukrainian president and Putin could be the outcome of this initial meeting. And that might be the win that comes out of the summit, is if they can say, we're moving towards this trilateral meeting, and that's the place where a peace agreement can be negotiated with all of the people who are involved sitting at the table.
Yeah. A lot of talk about eye contact tomorrow, what it's like to be face-to-face, looking into the eyes of Vladimir Putin. The president said he'll know in about 2 minutes whether he's serious. And we spoke yesterday on Balance of Power about this with Daniel Fried, the former U.S. ambassador to Poland, former Assistant Secretary of State for Europe, how he expects Vladimir Putin to behave, what Donald Trump will be looking at tomorrow. Here's what he said.
Putin can be charming when he wants to be. He can bristle with hostility when he wants to be. And my guess, he's going to start out being charming and try to throw something on the table that looks shiny and appealing but is useless.
Prepare for the charm offensive is the idea. Fried has been in the room with Putin a lot of times. He understands his personality, and, well, Putin understands Trump's personality. There was even talk today about a nuclear deal that could come out of this, an arms deal. Will Donald Trump play into that?
Look, I will say this, and I think Fried's an extremely smart guy. I think he probably has a point. The contours of the peace deal have been somewhat obvious for some time, right? Like Donetsk, Azov Coast, Zaporizhia, maybe some NATO peacekeeping troops. Like, people tend to know what this will likely look like in the end, right?
Is it Ukraine losing the Donbass?
We'll see. I mean, I think what you're probably going to have is Ukraine will have Zaporizhia, and there'll likely be NATO peacekeeping troops somewhere in Ukraine with security guarantees. Okay. Maybe the Donbass, right? They have to recognize Crimea,
That would be a big development.
But you know what? But you're right. And but the question is how you get there. And I think it's a very fair point. I will also say, I think it's very interesting to see, though, the evolution of Trump's relationship with world leaders. Netanyahu, he's to step back from a little bit, got a little bit closer to the EU and Zelensky, step back a little bit from Putin, say in the last 6 months. I will see if that continues.
Matt says peacekeeping troops potentially in the Donbass, Congresswoman. Is that how this ends? Isn't that a deal breaker for Vladimir Putin? Because that's what Europeans want to see.
You know, I think Secretary Rubio has said that they plan on insisting on having tangible security guarantees for Ukraine, and that may be in the form of EU peacekeeping support. I think, though, the important piece is that the Ukrainians are at the table when they're talking about trading away parts of their own territory. You know, Russia invaded a sovereign nation. They should have a voice in where they what is traded and what is exchanged at the peace negotiations table.
You want to see angry Trump tomorrow? What's his demeanor going into this?
Trump wants a deal badly. We've seen this, as Stephanie mentioned, with Azerbaijan and Armenia. He wants to make peace, and he's wanted to cut deals the entire term. The question is, what steps do you need to get there? Is today a positive tomorrow a positive first step?
Yeah.
Or what?
He doesn't want to do 2018 all over again, though, and hear about how, you know, he's got a bromance with Vladimir Putin. He needs to strike a certain tone.
I can't tell you how much that plays kind of in his head. I don't mean that like psychologically, but I mean he really thinks that his first term was marred by this media and Democratic obsession with Russiagate. Right. And so I think you're right. He doesn't want another Helsinki.
Well, that's right, Congresswoman. He's also been laying the groundwork most recently to kind of upend the narrative around the Russia interference in the 2016 election. He's got his DNI out there talking about Barack Obama as opposed to Donald Trump being the one who got this whole thing going. Does that play into the conversation tomorrow?
I think it plays into the conversation for the far-right media ecosystem. I mean, Barack Obama hadn't been president for several presidential terms now, so it's a little bit odd that we're reaching so far back into history to have a topic of conversation when what is at the table tomorrow is the resolution of an ongoing conflict in Ukraine. And whether or not Donald Trump has the respect of Putin, or will you see something that underscores what people have said, that perhaps Putin has something on Donald Trump? So I think people will be watching that dynamic very closely to see which one of these narratives they find evidence for.
Got it. Matt Gorman and Stephanie Murphy, really appreciate the insights and a great conversation today. Tomorrow we will be bringing you live extended coverage of what could be an historic summit in Alaska. Historic in its own right. We're on the ground in Anchorage with full analysis from Washington. It all starts tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thank you for joining us, as always, on Balance of Power. We'll see you back here tomorrow, only on Bloomberg.